Our message today comes from Barb Donay and Jace D., who traveled in mission to Guatemala with Sharing the Dream. And so while they're coming up and kind of getting themselves settled, I want to mention a connection that I see in today's gospel reading from Luke with our church's concept of mission. You know, most of us can relate to Martha in this story. I think it's a little bit hilarious that about every 3 years, I'm the one that gets this passage. It's God's sense of humor, truly, because I do have Martha tendencies, though my inner Mary is really coming out, let me tell you. But most of us relate to Martha, who welcomes Jesus into her home, and she's busy preparing for her guests, making a comfortable space for them, preparing food, and we can imagine what else she's doing. And when she realizes that her sister Mary is sitting down listening to Jesus, we can feel her frustration. And she brings it directly to Jesus. Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work? You know, tell her then, help me, you tell her. Well, Jesus' reply is that Mary has chosen the better part. And from the very first time that we hear this story in Sunday school or wherever you heard it for the first time, the surface message that we take away is be like Mary, not like Martha, right? That's what we hear. Martha's busy doing. She's just busy doing. But what if the message goes deeper? The clues are in two phrases that we see in this passage. In the very first sentence, we are told that Jesus and his disciples are on the way. On their way where? To Jerusalem. And we know what's going to happen in Jerusalem. Jesus knows that he's heading toward the cross. So he's stopped on his way at the home of his good friends, Martha and Mary and Lazarus. Maybe he needs their company and their comfort too, maybe. He knows how precious this moment in time is for him. The second clue is in the way that Jesus answers Martha's demand. Where I used to hear him say her name sternly, Martha, 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 Martha. Now I hear him say it tenderly, Martha, Martha. When somebody calls you by name, it feels good, doesn't it? I hear him say it tenderly, Martha, Martha. He really sees her. He hears beyond her complaint. He doesn't say that what she's doing is unnecessary. He doesn't reprimand her or point out, that she's doing it wrong and Mary's doing it right. He recognizes instead her worry and her distraction, and that they're keeping her from seeing what the most important thing is at this moment, which is to be with him. He makes it very clear that being aware, noticing, just like the Good Samaritan last week, being aware and noticing is critical to knowing what God needs from us at any given moment. Our church's concept of mission, the ELCA in our neighborhoods and around the world, is accompaniment. It's called accompaniment. Not just going in to do something for someone else, but first and foremost, being present with each other and with Jesus. And from that interaction will flow opportunities for serving on both sides as we give and receive. That is what Barb and Jace did in Guatemala. And so let's welcome them with our applause.
Good morning. As Laura mentioned, I'm Barb Donay, and this is my son, Jace. We had the opportunity to travel to Guatemala this past February with Sharing the Dream. It was my third trip down there with Sharing the Dream, and it was Jace's first. So I was really excited to introduce Guatemala to him. He will be going back. He's already trying to plan his next trip down there. If you're not familiar with Sharing the Dream, that's a program that I learned about through our Savior's Lutheran Church here. It's a nonprofit based out of South Dakota, but they do their work in Guatemala. So a couple times a year we have craft sales of Guatemalan made products here at the church. The purchase of those craft products are providing life for people in Guatemala. We're working with these people. There's several different programs down there that we work with. We're only going to touch on a handful of those today, of the groups that we visited while we were there. But by us purchasing their items here in the States, and they have sales all across the United States, the people in Guatemala are able to earn a fair wage for their work down there, and it's helping provide sustainability for the people that live and work in Guatemala. The first photos you see here is the Elder Center land. Sharing the Dream was actually gifted land from the government in Guatemala to build a new Elder Center. Right now, they're renting Elder Center space. It's expensive, and it's also located quite a distance from where a lot of the elders live that come to the program. So they've been working the last couple of years on this land. Even though they were gifted it, there's a lot of political hoops to jump through to actually get everything up and running so that they can start building. They've raised almost $200,000. They're about $60,000 shy from getting the rest of the funds needed to complete that project. But the elders are so excited about it that they've cleared the rock from the land. All these elders and their children and their grandchildren, they go out and they've handpicked the rock off the land to clear it for the building. They're pulling the weeds. So it's not uncommon to go by and just see some elders out there preparing the land. They're going to put in a garden at the Elder Center. They want to do a village concept. It's also where the beaters work. It's where the elders receive their meals and their activities. So hopefully in the next year or two, we can see the ground get broken and actually see that building start getting put up. And we can stay on this slide for a minute. Jace is going to talk. Can we go back one slide? Is that possible? Okay, thank you. Yeah, this one. Yep.
All right, so the picture with the two women are the elders sponsored by Our Savior's Lutheran. And right now, the Elder Center can sustain 60 elders for $300 a year per elder. When an elder gets sponsored, it provides 3 meals a week, health care, and holiday celebrations. And Meals on Sandals is a program started so elders who are sick or can't make it to the center can receive their food. Next slide. So the elders get 3 meals a week. They get to take them home, but when they come to get their meals, they are now learning exercise, and they have people come in to help them stay in shape. When we went, they planned an activity, and we all played bingo with elders. And when they won, they got a little piece of watermelon.
And that little piece of watermelon was a big deal, so they were really itching to win that bingo game to get that slice of watermelon. Jace, while he was down there, we sponsor an elder as our family as well. While he was down there, there was an elder that didn't have a sponsor, and they were seeking a sponsor. And he was helping him play bingo, and he said, well, I'll sponsor him. And I said, no, you won't. And he said, no, yes, I will. And I said, no, you won't. And we got in an argument. I said, we already sponsor an elder, so, we'll find a sponsor for him. And he insisted. He said, he needs an elder. I can do it. It's a long weekend of work for me. So he picked up his own elder that he now sponsors, in addition to the elders we sponsor through our church. The next slide is one of our beaters. The beating group works out of the Elder Center, so they kind of work upstairs in the office there. This gal taught me how to make a bracelet, so I actually beaded my own bracelet. I laughed that she picked the most thick bracelet. It's almost thicker than my skinny wrist, and I thought I'd never get it done, and she was not going to let me go until I finished it. So thank goodness I was able to figure it out. They work upstairs. Many of you have seen the jewelry come through here. So they make the jewelry. They're being paid a fair wage to make the jewelry. And then the profits from the jewelry sales actually pays the director's salary that runs the Elder Center. It pays for the rent, the utilities. So the profits that they're making go all right back into sustaining the Elder Center so that they can have that building for the elders to go to. And they'll continue to do that once they get in the new building.
Next slide, please. Thank you. Scholarship students, students who show need, can be picked up by Sharing the Dream to be scholarship students. And when they're picked up, they have to use tutors, they have to pass their grades, and they also have to do a certain amount of volunteering time. So most of them will go and volunteer at the Elder Center for making meals.
The scholarship student you see in the picture here is also sponsored by Our Savior's Lutheran Church. So we had the opportunity to meet her. There's 3 levels of sponsorship for the scholarship students. It's a little cheaper when they're in middle school, and then as they get older, it costs a little bit more money to sponsor them. What you'll see in Guatemala is it's really hard for kids to go to school because their parents want them home making jewelry or whatever they can at work to try to bring money into the household. So as you visit the schools, there's a lot of little kids in the school, but as you get to 5th and 6th grade, you'll notice that there's only a couple people in those classrooms, and oftentimes they'll say, well, they're home because they had to stay home and work today. So for us to be able to provide a couple $100s a year to sponsor these kids provides a whole array of opportunity for them to be able to continue to stay in school and actually get a good job when they're done. In the next slide, this is one of the public schools that we visited. Sharing the Dream actually helped build this school about 16 years ago. They get very little government assistance. So Sharing the Dream and the parents helped build the school. A lot of the parents now will go in and volunteer. They've added on a couple of rooms. So the parents will go up as they're able and try to build additions to the school. We did take them school supplies on my last trip, but we did not on this one. But they know when we're coming and they always ask. But one of the things Sharing the Dream does is they don't want to create an atmosphere of them expecting handouts when we go down. So we're not going to go down and just continue to supply them. If they have needs, they can ask and it'll be considered. And then even then, when we do take school supplies down, we never take it from us and hand it to the children as a handout. We take it in, it's provided to the principal, and the principal then distributes it to the children or the classrooms so that it's not that handout phase. You can see it's very sparsely decorated. It's hard to tell in these photos because it's a little bit dark, but the desks are very well broken in, highly stained, discolored, falling apart. On the next slide, this is a privately funded school. So you can see the difference. It's almost a Montessori-style teaching school, obviously run by an American. You can see the American touches on the school. Parents that can't afford to send their kids to this school will also work to send their kids. So they're making jewelry, they're making stuffed animals, they're making different things that they sell to be able to pay their children's tuition to go to this school.
On the next slide, it is about soccer in Guatemala. So while we were down there, we met a guy named Antonio, and he used to be a scholarship student, but now he's an employee for Sharing the Dream, and he kind of works as a handyman. He was with us for a lot of the trip, and I spent a lot of time with him. But we played soccer around some of the cities with some of the kids.
Okay. On the next slide, this is one of the groups that we've worked with for several years. The women that are in this group are widows of the 36-year Civil War in Guatemala. So Guatemala had a horrible period of civil war. A lot of men just disappeared. They'd go out to work in the cornfields, and there were a lot of guerrillas, and if they thought the man had too many tortillas, they assumed he was rich, and so they'd rob him and kill him while he was at work. So a lot of these women have husbands or sons who went to work one day and never came back, and they don't ever know what happened to them. So they've started a group, and they do a lot of backstrap weaving and loom weaving. You see a lot of their products, scarves, keychains, billfolds. They had made some men's clothing and were pretty excited to dress Jace up in it while we were there. Obviously trying to get him to buy it too. And one of the things we're told when we go on these trips, they do all display, if they have items for sale, they do lay those out so that we can purchase them. But we're never to purchase anything out of pity. We're never to purchase anything that's not good quality. They do workshops with all these groups that we work with and teach them quality control. If something isn't up to par, we don't purchase it to bring it back here and sell it. So they really are working very hard on teaching them quality work and to make products that'll sell back here in the States. The next slide is actually a picture of the Peace Park, which is just down the street from where most of these ladies live. Part of the Civil War, some of the community members went out one night to protest the Army. And while they were out there, it was families, it was kids, they were all out there protesting the Army. And the Army opened fire into the crowd and killed a bunch of people, and they're now buried there in the Peace Park. And I think the youngest grave was a 9-year-old, I believe.
No, it's like 5.
It was 5. So, small children were killed there. At one point back in 1990, 2 Army soldiers got drunk and killed a civilian, and the city went against the Army, and that Army has now been expelled from that city, and they're not allowed to come back into city limits, and that's been in place since the 90s. It also prompted another city to do the same thing. So because of the unrest with the Army, the distrust from the community members, even 20, 30 years later, the Army's not allowed in that community.
The next slide is the Spoon Group. They use scrap wood that they can find. It's all handmade, and they use scrap wood found around. There's different kinds of wood they use, and with the profits of their spoons, they use it to support their own elder program and help elders around their area.
And you can see kind of the shape of the duck taking place. So they draw it out on a piece of wood, and how they initially cut it is with a machete. So in that far left picture, it's hard to see, but they literally take a machete and hack the initial design into the wood, and then they move down onto smaller tools to continue to shape them and refine them for sale. The next slide is also a group, kind of similar. They do a lot of scarves, a lot of beading, things like that. They were also mostly widowed from the war. Their name is meaning under the stars. A lot of these women hid in the forest when the Army came in. There was an area not far from them where the Army tricked families and invited them to a church, claiming it was a celebration, and they got everybody in the church and locked it and burned it down. So a lot of these women have suffered through that, through the loss of family members. The girl standing in the back by the stove, kind of in the background, her name is Isa, and she's actually a former scholarship student, and she's now the artisan director. So she's the one that works with all the groups on the quality control, product development, and she's been doing that for several years. This is her mother. They made us lunch while we were there. We, of course, provided the food. We had chicken, but she was boiling it in that big pot, and she was teaching us how they lay out their fire to cook inside. Asthma is a really big problem down there because they cook on open fire a lot. It's extremely smoky, so a lot of people have asthma issues. And then Isa, before she became a scholarship student, for 2 years prior to this program being developed, they ate nothing but tortillas and salt. That's the only food they can afford, was tortillas and salt, and they make their own tortillas. You see people in line in the mornings with their corn, taking it in to get it ground, and that's what they survive off of. The next slide is the Pine Needle Group, and I'm sure you guys have seen their products. The last couple of sales, we're starting to get more and more. They actually take pine needles and weave them into baskets, so they demonstrated how they do that for us. They've said because pine needles, the basket weaving has gotten so popular, now they have to buy their pine needles. They have to pay to go into a forest to collect the pine needles because people have realized that you can use them to make money. So now, of course, that cost is part of what they used to be able to just go collect for free, they now have to pay for. The next photo is just an example of one of the cemeteries. They're in pretty rough shape, but yet there's constant flowers. You see a lot of fresh flowers being left on a regular basis because all the graves have a flower pot on them. Most of the spots are rented, and the families continue to pay the rental fees for years, and if you don't, they'll just get your body out and bring another one in. So the families work pretty hard to try to pay those rental fees. As you walk, you can tell that there's some people that couldn't afford to be buried there, and they've just kind of stuck them in the ground wherever they could find, and there's little piles all throughout as you're walking down the path.
The next slide is the glass blowing. So they sort and use recycled glass that they can find, and when they do it, they have little groups of 3, and everybody has their own part. One person will be in charge of melting, the second will be in charge of swirling, and then the third will be in charge of cooling, and then they have little stations they take it through. If they don't do the glass blowing, they are unemployed and wouldn't be able to get jobs.
Yeah, the community where the glass blowing was extremely impoverished, and so they had to come up with a way, and it actually employed quite a few people, and they do it. It is a fine-tuned process because those 3 guys, and they each have their station, are constantly moving and never stopping because they're putting out glass after glass after glass, and we got to watch them shape them all, add color to them, but it's all recycled, and there were guys that were in one room and all they were doing was sorting broken glass so that they could melt it down again and make new product. The next page is an example of some foot loom weaving. I know it's easy for us to pick up a scarf and think, wow, this is beautiful, but you don't really think of what goes into hand making a scarf like that. And this is just an example of the setup for that. They were out stretching the thread just out on the road because that's the only space they have to do it. And then to set up the equipment, and that's a luxury for them to have that equipment. A lot of them still do it by hand, but they had the equipment so that they can put out more product. The next photo is just it was kind of a touristy moment for us. It's not really a program that we work with Sharing the Dream, but they did take us to some ruins, which were really interesting because they were from the Ketchikel Mayan group, and it's back from 1470. So when you think of the history, it was a fortress kind of over the water, and you think of the history that went into that. When we go down, not even all the people speak Spanish. More people speak Mayan languages than Spanish, and so we have to have it translated from Mayan to Spanish to English when we go down there. So it's not a simple matter of going from Spanish to English. It takes quite some time to have a conversation when you go down there. But we have good translators that come along and take care of that for us.
Next slide. So in Guatemala, traveling is expensive, so most people have to walk. But some of the main ways we got around were by the truck. We'd stand in the back and they had bars to hold on to. And then the buses. And on the next slide, there's more. So the little red taxi kind of thing in the left is a tuk-tuk. We only took that once, I think. But we also crossed from Santiago to where? Chacaya. So we traveled from Santiago to Chacaya by the little cayucas.
It's extremely expensive.
Yeah, it's expensive. Next slide, please. So life in Guatemala isn't easy. There's a lot of poverty, but people still find ways to be happy. So their needs are just the basic needs, food and shelter. That's all they struggle to afford that. So yeah, most of them are just stuck with tortillas. And there's one more slide. So we went down to the lake, and she's carrying a cooler on her head with no arms. Since the lake's their only source of water, they're forced to wash their clothes, and it's very contaminated from the runoff of all the farming. So they have to build up an immune system.
So when we were crossing the lake on the cayucas, it's extremely expensive to rent those to cross the lake, but it was either we go that way or it was an hour-long pickup ride. So they opted to send us over in the cayucas and bring us back in the pickups. But they say, don't even dip your fingers. You're in this beautiful volcano, this beautiful lake. It's one of the most beautiful lakes you'll ever see, but it is so heavily contaminated. They tell us not to even dip our fingers in, because if we then touch our lips or something, we're likely to get sick because it's that contaminated. But yet the local people are bathing and doing laundry in that lake because it's their only source to get that done. The next slide just kind of talks about what you can do to support Sharing the Dream. Our church is a very heavy supporter of Sharing the Dream by sponsoring the elders, scholarship students, by putting sales on each year. So we've talked about some of the different ways. There's several other groups out there that they work with. They're an excellent organization because they're on top of quality control. They want to make sure it's not a handout. They're teaching the Guatemalan people how to have a sustainable lifestyle and earn a fair wage. So it's a great program to work with and work for. He's looking forward to going back, as am I. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to hit me up after the service today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I know from just conversations I've had with you too, that just developing relationships with those people, I have a feeling, Jace, that you made some friends with those elders that you'll never forget. So we thank you for your time in doing that. And I know that there are many people in our congregation who have reached out in mission across the world, but also in our country and in our neighborhoods. And so being watchful, noticing is our message today. Thank you so much.